Okay, so what is up, beautiful people? So today's topic that we are going to learn is about speciation. So if we try to, split up the word speciation, we'll get two words, which is species and ation. Species, as the name suggests, it refers to the organism or the individual, and the ation means a process or the action. So if we try to dig deep into the definition of speciation, then we'll get to know that it means the development of new species can occur when population are reproductively isolated. अब reproductively isolated का मीनिंग ये बन रहा है कि जस्ट फॉर एग्जांपल एक एरिया है, एक लैंड मैस है, वहाँ पे एक स्पीशीज़ है और वो स्पीशीज़ ट्राई करता है कि इंटरब्रीड करे, बट देर इज सम सॉर्ट ऑफ barrier which is preventing them to interbreed with each other. It can be either a geographical barrier or some other barrier which we are going to discuss in this lecture. So speciation का two types होता है. The speciation has two types, which is allopatric and sympatric speciation. So let's first learn about allopatric speciation. So the allopatric speciation, just for an example, I have drawn a circle here. It's just an example. एक सर्कल को आप ऐसे इमेजिन करो कि इट इज़ अ लैंड मास. जस्ट इमेजिन इट एज अ लैंड मास and there is some sort of barrier because of which a species which is present in this whole landmass is being separated into two halves. And because of this barrier, the species which is present at this point has no chance of breeding with the species at this point. So because of this geographical barrier, both species are separated. Both species are the same species, but the individuals or the organisms from these two species are being separated. So let's read the definition of allopatric speciation. So geographical barrier acts as a hindrance. It acts as a hindrance which separates two species to breed, because of which changes start to occur in species. It can be either a genetic drift or natural selection. One of the best examples that I can give you from allopatric speciation is the finches of Darwin. मतलब जो if we have a knowledge about Darwin's finches, then we got to know that in different islands there were the same species of finches which migrated, but they had some sort of morphological changes in their body due to the food that they got or the habitat that they lived. So with the same thing, there is a landmass which is having same species, but they are separated due to some barrier, and because of this barrier there is no breeding between these two places, species, and because of which by the time passes there is some changes in their genetics, or because of natural selection they develop some characteristics which the other party doesn't have. So the next speciation that we are going to see is about sympatric speciation. So the sympatric speciation, unlike allopatric speciation, which is happening due to the geographical barriers, here there is no geographical barrier, but there are some barriers within the individual itself, because of which the interbreeding is not happening, or even if it's happening, it is not successful. So sympatric speciation has two kinds, which is pre-zygotic barriers and post-zygotic barriers. Okay, so let's learn about some of the pre-zygotic barriers. There are actually many pre-zygotic barriers, but out of those I have selected three barriers which according to me is actually necessary and helpful for studying, and it's important among those. So the first barrier is the behavioral isolation. So in behavioral isolation, the barrier is within the species, but this barrier is actually a behavioral change or a behavioral difference between the species. मतलब कि एक ही species है, दोनों एक जैसे ही दिखते होंगे, बट उन दोनों स्पीशीज़ के बीच का बिहेवियर के चेंज के होने की वजह से देर इज़ नो चांस ऑफ interbreeding within each other. So we can take an example of western meadowlark or eastern meadowlark. सो वेस्टर्न मेडलार्क एंड ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क का डिफरेंस यहाँ पे ये इसलिए बोलते हैं बिकॉज द ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क produces some kind of a sound which only attracts the other party of the eastern meadlark, like एक ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क दूसरे ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क को ही अट्रैक्ट कर पाता है क्योंकि बिकॉज ऑफ प्रोडक्शन ऑफ अ मेटिंग साउंड फ्रॉम द इंडिविजुअल इटसेल्फ. लेट्स फॉर एन एग्जांपल, अब ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क एक साउंड प्रोड्यूस करता है विच अट्रैक्ट्स ओनली द ईस्टर्न मेडलार्क, the other organism from eastern meadlark, but it doesn't attract the western meadlark. So because of which there is no interbreeding between the same species, but there is a difference of sound or the behavior. I hope you understood this. So the second isolation that we are going to talk about is temporal isolation. So the word temporal means time, yani ki it's something related to time, and the reason for isolation is time. Now for an example, here we can see that one owl is sitting in a tree during the daytime and the other owl is sitting during the night time. Now because of this time difference, there is some sort of difference between the two owls, and because of which these two owls are not able to interbreed with each other. अब जब एक स्पीशीज का जागने का टाइम और सोने का टाइम ही डिफरेंट हो जा रहा है तो वो दोनों स्पीशीज, एक ही स्पीशीज के जो ऑर्गेनिजम्स हैं वो एक दूसरे के साथ ब्रीड नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. सो दिस इज टेम्पोरल आइसोलेशन. हैबिटल आइसोलेशन, आई वुड गिव एन एग्जाम्पल. फॉर एन एग्जाम्पल, इफ वी टेक एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ फ्रॉग. सो frog is an amphibian, and as an amphibian it can either live in land or water. Just suppose one frog tries to live in water and the other amphibian or the frog tries to live in land. Because of this difference between the two organisms in one species, there is some sort of isolation, the reproductive isolation, because of which the water-based frog tries to mate with the other water-based frog and the terrestrial frog tries to breed with other terrestrial frog. और इसी रीज़न की वजह से terrestrial frog और water-based frog are not able to mate with each other. So because of this हैबिटेट का डिफरेंस, एक हैबिटेट के डिफरेंस के होने की वजह से एक रिप्रोडक्टिव आइसोलेशन का फॉर्मेशन हो जा रहा है. सो दिस इज हैबिटल आइसोलेशन. लेट्स गो इनटू द पोस्ट जाइगोटिक आइसोलेशन, पोस्ट जाइगोटिक बैरियर. सो इन पोस्ट जाइगोटिक बैरियर, अनलाइक प्री जाइगोटिक बैरियर, यहाँ पे जाइगोट का फॉर्मेशन तो हो जा रहा है बट स्टिल देयर इज सम काइंड ऑफ बैरियर विद इन द ऑर्गेनिज्म कि वो अगर फर्टाइल, अगर जाइगोट का फॉर्मेशन हो भी जा रहा है तो वो शायद एक इंडिविजुअल का फॉर्मेशन नहीं कर पा रहा है. अगर वो इंडिविजुअल का फॉर्मेशन कर भी पा रहा है तो वो एक बहुत ही वीक इंडिविजुअल का फॉर्मेशन कर पा रहा है जो इम्यूनिटी के वाइज बहुत वीक रहता है, या फिर वो एक ऐसा एक इंडिविजुअल का फॉर्मेशन करता है जो हेल्दी तो रहता है लेकिन वो एक नेक्स्ट जनरेशन को प्रोड्यूस करने की कैपेबिलिटी नहीं रख पाता है. लेट्स डिस्कस इन डिटेल. So in first example, if we see, we can see this organism which is zonkey. Zonkey is a mixed breed between zebra and a donkey. जैसे आप लोग को stripes में देखने को मिल रहा है, it has a stripes of a zebra, but its face is just like a donkey. So what happens is like एक perfect individual का formation तो हो जा रहा है, but zonkey का एक demerit यहाँ पे ये आ रहा है. The demerit that which we can see here is that zonkey cannot produce the other generation of its own species. मतलब for an example, zonkey is a new species. Okay, अब zonkey का production तो हो गया but zonkey doesn't have that sort of what we say chromosomal number inside himself or herself or itself to produce the other generation of zonkey, because of which there is some kind of a barrier which stops zonkey at that generation itself. The other example that we can see here is just one example. इंटरब्रीडिंग हो चुका है दो ऑर्गेनिजम्स के बीच में, बट वो जो ऑर्गेनिज्म फॉर्म हुआ है स्पीशीज़ के अंदर वो बहुत ही वीक है. बहुत वीक होने की वजह से उस इंडिविजुअल का नेक्स्ट जनरेशन वहाँ पे प्रोड्यूस नहीं हो पा रहा है. तो उस वजह से एक ऑर्गेनिज्म का फॉर्मेशन तो हो रहा है, ज़रूर हो रहा है, बट there is no formation of the next generation because the individual is weak itself. So the third thing that we can discuss is the zygote is being formed, but it is not forming the individual that we are expecting of. Before the formation of the organism or the individual, that zygote is collapsing. It can happen in post-zygotic barriers only. So this was all about speciation. So speciation means development of new species can occur. So there's a word can occur. So species can occur when population are reproductively isolated. Speciation has two kinds: allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Allopatric speciation has a geographical barrier, and sympatric speciation doesn't have a geographical barrier, but it has a barrier inside the organism itself. I hope you understood this lecture. If you have any doubts,